Hi guys, James at Rampant Lion Reviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to return once again to Aberdeenshire, to one of my old local breweries, and that of course is Brewdog. But this is quite an interesting beer. This was a prototype that they released earlier in the year, and this is called Stereo Wolf Stout, and this is intended to replace the Brixton Porter. It's meant to be really nice, and it's described as Dark Audio Storm, so should be a very interesting beer. And if you've watched my channel before, you'll know that I love Brewdog stouts. I really think this is a style that Brewdog particularly excel in. Riptide is one of my favourite stouts of all time probably. But for this video I have to give a shout out to Fabrizio Rossi, my new friend from Sao Paulo in Brazil. Although despite his Italian name, he actually supports the German national football team and has a particular love of Iceland, and also holds an Italian passport. But very nice guy, and thanks to him you will be seeing some Brazilian reviews on my channel later on in the year. So a big shout out to Fabrizio Rossi, and he actually asked me about this beer, so it's cool that I can review it for you now and give him a shout out on the channel. But anyway, as is usual with my beer reviews then, I'll take you through a very brief history of Brewdog. I've done loads of these reviews before, so it will be a very shortened version. If you want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. The brewery website's in the description for you below, along with a link to my other reviews that I've done from Brewdog before, and you can bet your mortgage that there will be more Brewdog reviews in the fairly near future. So anyway, Brewdog is the love child of James Watt and Martin Dickey, and it was founded back in 2007, and their first brewery was in the Keswick Industrial Estate in Fraserburgh in the very northeast of Scotland, right on the tip of the monster's nose, as I always describe it to people from outside of the country. But more recently they've moved their main brewing operations to their new purpose-built facility in Ellon in Aberdeenshire, which is actually just to the north of the main city of Aberdeen. But these guys are known for being a very experimental brewery. They've experimented with very high strength brews. I mean, the Tactical Nuclear Penguin, Sink the Bismarck and The End of History, all winning awards for those, but they are largely influenced, or inspired if you like, by the American craft brewing renaissance. They actually say that Stone Brewery in California was the real brewery that kind of pushed them to do the beers that they're actually brewing now. So quite an interesting brewery, and they are the largest independently owned Scottish brewery at the moment, so very cool in that regard. But they've become very worldwide recently because of their use of social media, and they've got a thriving chain of brew pubs that actually started with my local one back in 2009 in Aberdeen. They expanded throughout the rest of the UK over the following years, down into Glasgow and Edinburgh, and then down into England after that. But now they have sites in Sweden, Italy, Japan, Brazil, and I think they're actually starting to open ones up in Spain, and also in Australia, New Zealand, and overlooking at the States and Canada now as well. So very exciting times ahead for Brewdog, and a lot of their actions that they do with this brewery are actually crowd-funded, so you can buy into the Equity for Punks scheme, as they call it. They've just started up Equity for Punks 4 actually, and they use this to expand their brewery and things. So basically you buy shares in the company and you get discounts at the brewery shop and things like that. I actually need to do that at some point, because I do get quite a lot of beer from Brewdog, and hopefully, I actually hope they'll sponsor me for the channel because of the amount of reviews I've done for them at some point, but we'll keep fingers crossed for that in the future. But anyway, that's a sort of brief history of the Brewdog brewery for you just now, so we'll get on to the tasting of this beer itself. I'll just bring up the camera and let you have a little quick look at the artwork for this one. As I mentioned to you, this guy is actually a 5.2% stout. It's this is the new Prototype labels actually. Since I last did Prototype reviews for you, I actually missed the Prototype range 2014 because I was away in Australia. You can see they've redesigned the label of this. You've got new Brewdog caps with a new dog symbol. They've changed that slightly, although it is very reminiscent of the old one there, but you can see they've actually gone for a much plainer kind of label style than they had before. I do miss the old labels, but they do like to change them, and the beer's still good, so it's not such a big deal. But to tell you about the specs of this beer, it's 5.2% ABV, as I said to you. It's hopped with Pacific Northwest Galena hops and also English Bramling Cross, which are meant to be quite earthy, so it gives you a malt base as well of 5 different malts, but it didn't say what they actually were. But without further ado, let's actually get on and have a taste of this. Oh, it tells you on the side, sorry, what the malts are. So you've got extra pale, special W, roasted barley, carafa, and flaked oats. And as I said, a hop base of Galena and Bramling Cross. So yeah, should be a very nice beer. As I've said before, stout beers from Brewdog are one of my favourite styles. So let's get this guy open and we'll get on with the tasting. As you can see, a nice smoky opening there as I pull it off, and we'll just get it out into the glass. Really oily looking beer actually. Nice big tan head on it, as you expect from this particular style, and from Brewdog, of course. The Germans always say that a good beer has to have a good head on it, and I'm very inclined to agree with them, I have to admit. So let me just bring up the camera and let you have a little look at this beer. So as you can see, it's poured with a nice finger and a half of a very kind of rich looking foamy tan or beige head. It looks really, really good. If I hold it up to the light, it does have a very slight ruby tinge to the edge of the glass, but it is particularly sort of ebony or rosewood is probably the best kind of colour to describe that. I always find the wood colours are very good for describing beers. If I put my fingers behind it, it's not transparent at all, but I think that might just be because of the colour of it, to be honest. There's a little bit of carbonation just sticking to the side of the glass, some big bubbles, but mainly there's just little bubbles going up towards the bottom of the head, but it is quite hard to see into that just because of the dark colour of the beer, like I said. So yeah, a very attractive looking beer, so let's give it a smell. Yeah, it's actually, for a Brewdog Stout, it actually has a very kind of fruity aroma on this one, which is quite interesting. It's almost sort of black, a mix of kind of black currants, which I know is one of the sort of characteristics you should expect from the Galena hop. The Galena can give you a sort of citrusy blackcurrant flavour, but it can give some kind of grapefruit aromas too. And you can actually smell that. There is a teeny bit of grapefruit coming off it, but it's mainly a sort of citrusy and more darker kind of blackcurrant aroma. So just pay attention to that if you do get this beer. It's very interesting to get a stout that is kind of quite fruity in this way. But yeah, you've got a nice heavy malt aroma under there as you sugar it up. As you sugar it up, you get a bit more of what you would expect from a stout, because it does come across, the aroma comes across more as being that of a black IPA. But yeah, you've got a nice heavy malt in there, some kind of dark and roasted elements coming out, a little bit of caramel. You can pick up a little bit of woodiness as well, but the fruit, the kind of citrusy grapefruit and the blackcurrants in there is actually fairly prominent. As I say, it comes across more in the aroma as a black IPA. Yeah, there's a definite citrusy and kind of florally element to this. A little bit of blackcurrant there too, I think. So it's quite interesting, and there is definite grapefruit presence in there, so it really does in the aroma come across as more of a black IPA. But if you sugar it up, you start to get the very dark and roasted elements, some caramel and some woody notes as well. So a very nice smelling beer actually. So without further ado, this is the Stereo Wolf Stout, the Dark Audio Storm as they call it, from Brewdog in Ellon, Aberdeenshire. A toast to Fabrizio Rossi from Sao Paulo in Brazil. Slanja. Now it's very, very different in feel from any of the stouts I've had from Brewdog before actually. Even in terms of the flavour, it actually does come across as being more of a black IPA, but it has the mouthfeel of a stout, so it's quite interesting. Yeah, so you've got actually quite a kind of light feeling malt base, and as I said, it does have extra pale and roasted barley and stuff in it, and flaked oats, so it is quite a cereal malt base in it. You can pick that up in the flavour, but the malt base in comparison to their other stouts is very mild. It feels very, very light, so I wonder if the pale malt that's in this is the kind of biggest quantity of malt that they've put in. But yeah, the malt base is very light. You can really feel that pale malt just blanketing the tongue there, but there is an element of cerealness to it. You can pick out the kind of barley in there, maybe just a little bit of oaty flavours too. The caramel is actually very, very mild, I have to say. There is just a little teeny bit of sweetness in it, but you're more getting a kind of dark roasted coffee element moving towards the edge of the tongue. There's a really dark roasted coffee flavour in there. There is a little bit, just a very little bit of chocolate sweetness in it. I mean, overall it is a very pale malt base, which is quite interesting. Yeah, there's a little bit of dark chocolate sweetness in there that just kind of builds on top of that very pale malt base. and just a kind of, there is a little bit of caramel sweetness in there, but it is very mild. It really is a very plain malt base, if you like. It's not as flavourful as some of the other ones you'll get from Brewdog, I think, but you've got a nice coffee and sort of cocoa roasted bitterness that just moves out towards the edge of the tongue there. So a very different stout from Brewdog, actually, I have to admit, this one. As you move into it a little bit more, you've got a little bit of a kind of woody taste builds on top of that malt base too. So the malt base seems to kind of build in time as you're just tasting this beer. But as I say, a very, very different feel to this stout from the other ones I've had from Brewdog before. It's a lot less creamy and a lot lighter feel, and it is perhaps a little bit more in terms of flavour. It's more like a black IPA because you are getting the hoppy elements around the edge of the tongue, but it does have a bit more of a mouthfeel like a stout. But yeah, it is around the edge of the tongue. There is a little bit of a kind of citrusy, more of a kind of floral element that's coming out from this hop. There's no kind of grapefruit, as I was saying, that the Galena hop kind of gives off in the aroma, but there is just a little bit of a citrusy, very light sort of lemony citrus around the edge of the tongue, but it is very mild. It more kind of gives off a kind of grassy and slightly floral aromatic-y hop, but it's not a very drying floral and aromatic hop, if that makes sense. But there's a definite earthy character in the hops that just goes around the edge of the tongue there. It's really nicely, the flavours actually blend together very, very well. But you just get a nice little bit of kind of citrusy juiciness, and you can pick up just a little bit of kind of blackberry flavour in there, in the little oily bubble that moves towards the front of the tongue. There is a little bit of just that nice kind of sweet blackberry in there, but the main fruit element in this really is a very light sort of lemony citrus, but it's not too sharp, if that makes sense. It's more along the lines of a kind of grassy lemony feel, but around the front edges of the tongue there you're getting a nice kind of grassy and slightly citrusy hop there, and around the back edges is where you're getting the earthy character coming out that mixes well with that dark roasted and kind of coffee malt in there. So overall the flavour is really quite interesting on this, a very different feel to the other stouts I've had from Brewdog before. In terms of the mouth of this one, it is actually quite light-bodied, and it's the pale malt that really gives that off. It's a lot lighter than the other stouts you'll have from Brewdog. The carbonation is a little bit prickly, but no much more so than the other stouts you will get from Brewdog. It's got a very smooth mouthfeel. It is a little bit creamy, but it is a more kind of wet and slightly oily mouthfeel. But it's got quite a dry, roasted, bitter finish. That's kind of what goes into the aftertaste. It feels dry and kind of very dark, roasted coffee, if you like. And a little bit earthy as well, actually. I should say the earthy hops are kind of going into the aftertaste as well. So a nice dry, roasted, earthy sort of finish to this beer. But anyway, overall it's quite an interesting style. As I say, very different to some of the other ones I've had from Brewdog before. In some ways it comes across as more of a black IPA, but you do have more of the mouthfeel from the typical Brewdog stouts, if that makes sense. So it's a very interesting beer. You can talk about styles all day, but the fact is it tastes good, and I would recommend this one as being a nice dessert beer. As I always say, porters for me aren't a very sessionable beer. It's something that you have to enjoy the taste of, or drink, or have it with a dessert or something like that. That's what dark porters and stouts and stuff should really be used for, in my opinion. But some people like to session them, but that's not really me. But overall it's a very, very nice beer, and I would recommend you try it because it is different from the other stouts that Brewdog have done before, and it tastes great. So that's what you want. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed another review from Brewdog here. It's been cool to revisit the brewery. Please let me know in the comments section your own thoughts on this beer, as always. And please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. And I will catch you again soon with my next beer review. Cheers!